Okay, I think it's running. Go back up. Let's give it a whack again. Welcome back, analog devices, etc., so forth and so on. It's right in the middle of starting up, and suddenly it burped. And we had to restart. Not my fault. Okie dokie. Theoretically, let's see the counter. There we go. Okay, we're up to 49 seconds. And now it says I'm lost and I need to reconnect. Okay. Hello. I see some people. We've been having it's funky connections. Oops, just said it lost connection. Although the counter is still running, it may be just a weird circumstance. So I'm assuming that I'm still operational. Anyway, not my fault, kids. Titans, we are continuing with this charming little chapter. And there's not a huge number of technical sources in it, but at least it's better than the last couple too. But this one turned out to have an unexpected kicker to it. And this is also a Luskin week, so we will be putting some more examples of them not proving their main claim. I mean, this is the most monotonously unrewarding exercise, but somebody has to do it. I want it to be established if one looks through every single the Luskin list gave that you can absolutely state, nope, nothing supporting the material. Anyway, last time, of course, we had the bit about the mosaic platypus, and in this little same section of this chapter, Sarfati and Tay are bringing up a particular therizinosaur. It's a fairly new one, Chilesaurus from Chile. For those of you who are therizinosaurs, they are that curious little group of largely or presumably entirely herbivorous theropods. They've got weird long claws on their front limbs that are extended. They have a relatively long neck but still they're classified in that little realm. And some creationists have a field day with that. Well, Chilesaurus was another one. And apparently there's quite a few examples of them. How many times are they going to use Mount St. Helens? Oh, yes. Yes, that's in my title because golly gosh, it's continuous. Yes, we'll be getting to that in a little meringue that's independent from the part 1 and part 2 stuff. Okay. Chilesaurus, apparently there's quite a few of them from down in South America. And the example that's in this 2015 paper by Novas, which I'll be putting a link up to, is very probably a juvenile. So they've got kind of a little bit of a range across from it, although it's a fairly complete skeleton. Anyway, Sarfati and Tay are playing this, highlighting, quote, its long neck, small head, ankles, and feet resemble those of sauropods. Furthermore, it has leaf-shaped teeth that resemble the teeth of some sauropods and therizinosaurs, being a beak. Lastly, its pelvis exhibits features consistent with ornithschian dinosaurs, unquote. First of all, it's a very small animal, and if it's a juvenile, we may be seeing developmental processes, which Sarfati and Tay are paying no attention to whatsoever. But it is correct that the paper used the phrase extreme case of mosaic evolution. So they're kind of riffing off that. What's the difference between YEC and IED? That's an easy one to answer. Young Earth creationists trample over all of the scientific fields, whereas intelligent design are basically tunnel visioning in just on evolution. So all the material on cosmology and the Big Bang and all of that stuff is material that intelligent designers don't want to complain about. In fact, they often try to incorporate the Big Bang into their conceptual frame. So anybody that riffs on about radiating or seeing soft tissues miraculously surviving in dinosaurs, etc., they're a young Earth creationist. And they have a very constrained worldview. And they are therefore another big difference ultimately between young Earth creationist intelligent design, which figures in what we'll be talking about today, is that young Earth creationists do a stab at systematics, which is anything related to anything. whereas design never does that. Old Earth creationists never do that. There are no counterexamples. And the reason why young Earth creationists do it is because they're forced into it by the double bottleneck of the creation week and the flood. They can't avoid it, because otherwise many species to stick on Noah's Ark. So they've got to find a way of whittling down the species and having kinds generically large enough to be able to have a small number of them aboard the Ark. And that's effectively what's happened with the Ark encounter. So that's the short end. So ID is a subset of young Earth creationism in the sense that they're all unified in largely the same hyper-conservative culture camp anti-gay, fill in the blanks worldview, but they don't bother to stomp on quite the same elements. They have certain things in common. Most of the concepts of like irreducible complexity and that have their counterparts in older style young Earth creationism that they were just kind of inaugurating. But yes, so it's fair to say intelligent design is a narrower subset, or as I described it in my old tip work, all the ideology, but even less fact. Creationism. Anyway, back to this Chilesaurus. They were focusing on the fact that it had features that are like ceratosaurs, which are definitely theropods, a quote basal tetanuran unquote forelimb and scapular girdle, a coelurosaur-like pelvis. So all of these things are theropod elements. They're not ornithschians. And a tetanuran-like hindlimb. And tetanurans are kind of like at the base of the kind of generic saurs on up. And a general ankle and foot construction is not grouped with any theropod clade, probably as a result of the characters Chilesaurus, sauropodomorphs, and herrerasaurids. That apparently was what was causing Sarfati and Tay to think that it's got a foot like sauropod. No, it's a generic structure that would be shared in some anatomical generalities by all of those groups. And you just look at the thing and it doesn't look typically you would see in the big hoof of a major sauropod like a diplodocid or a brachiosaurid or anything of that type. So I've been putting this Novus paper in my Sarfati and Tay as misrepresenting the source material. The pelvic bit was also truncating a sense, where the pubis, quote, closely resembles that of basal ornithschians, therizinosaurs, and dromaeosaurid paravians in being fully retroverted, unquote. In other words, they were not claiming that it had a pelvis that looked ornithschian, one per se. It's that it resembled that broad range of dinosaurs where the pelvic thing ranks backwards, which you see in quite a lot of theropods, including the ones that lead off into birds, as well as birds themselves. It's one of the reasons why the bird hip ornithschians, even though that form isn't actually the direct ancestor of birds. And again, if you look at a feature, then this bit about this ornithschian-y hip structure. Let's see if I have a little in the papers that we'll be putting up. It's unclear whether Sarfati and Tay were all that familiar with some of the background of Chilesaurus, even though they're writing in 2022. I wasn't familiar with the taxon per se, so I decided to look up the thing, find out a little bit more about it, and that's when I discovered some of the fun controversies arraying around it. And it turns out somebody else was bumping into Chilesaurus, none other than our late and not lamented Gunter Beckley, who was sliding into this as a way of casting evolutionary systematics. There were some people, you have to remember how murky, to some extent, very early dinosaur history is. The forms that we see very clearly in the Jurassic with allosaurids and stegosaurs and Diplodocus / Brontosaurus types, nice, wonderful critters. Those highly specialized forms weren't around to begin with, let alone in the Triassic. and it's the fact that there's relatively limited range of a lot of the deposits to look in, so you have a sparser number of taxa, and they're increasingly very generic. We had alluded to in the way back about the studies that were concerned about how herrerasaurs fit into dinosaur paleontology. And it turns out that that very group, Norman and Barron and others, are figuring in this debate about where Chilesaurus fits in. And so there were some various papers, the Novus one in particular, that was certainly ranking it when they were looking at its cladistic features, despite its odd little peg-like teeth that are part of that herbivorous environment, and the issue about whether or not that was the case for the adults or not, and the retroverted pubis. But other than that, a fairly conventional skeletal layout. It was pretty much being nested into the therizinosaurs, which are part of the theropods, as a little sidebar. Not everybody was agreeing, however. And so a couple years later, you had some work from Barron and Barrett from 2017, and then a back and forth with critics from Muller in 2017, and they respond in 2018. So I'll be putting the links up to all these things that are going on in the Royal Society Biology Journal about whether or not Barron and Barrett were right to think that those ornithschian elements, basically the pubic layout, was sufficient for it to be classified as a transitional ornithschian rather than as a quirky little theropod. And this has been kind of going back and forth ever since. Muller, in particular, were calling attention to some goofs in Barron and Barrett's data set, and they had to revise stuff and so forth and so on. Well, anyway, Gunter Beckley is wading into all of this because in his view, this was supporting his contention that, quote, phylogenetics very much looks like a pseudoscience such as astrology or homeopathy, unquote. And he, in particular, played up this stuff from this 2021 paper that I'll be putting some material up on, the Norman paper, which has a big chart in laying out the various debates about how these major characters are fitting together, including a bunch that really isn't being paid attention to by Beckley, these Chilesaurids, that are all in that group of, like herrerasaurs, very basal structure. Herrerasaurs, in fact, have a pelvic structure that's kind of like the ornithschians, and yet everything else about it is kind of like theropods. So there's been a lot of unsettling as to how you're supposed to classify these early radiations of dinosaurs that are all kind of alike, and yet also not quite like the nice standard models that are happening later on. And without data to go on, remember, you don't have any genetics. You only have fragmentary fossils to go by, and therefore you're only going by their morphology, the shapes of things, because you don't have living organisms to look at to give any cross comparisons. You don't have developmental biology to look at. You don't have any genetics to be able to play around with. So that inevitably is going to make it trickier to do analyses. Beckley, of course, is just wading into this with delight and waving these papers back and forth. But one thing that particularly struck me about how Beckley was covering this subject is that he never explained on what features these various contending camps were getting into an argument over. And it's then you step back and realize, you know what's missing from Beckley? An explanation of what Beckley thinks was going on. What exactly was Chilesaurus? Was it related to anything or not? And that reinforces the point that I mentioned just earlier, intelligent design never does systematics. And Beckley, being in the paleontology community, and he's participated in papers that would be classifying little insect bits, which is his main field, was his field, in terms of like family relationships, and therefore buried in there is a systematic rigor. And yet at no point has any intelligent design person ever been caught dead trying to delineate what, if anything, is related to anything. Jackson Wheat and I are going to be calling attention to this in terms of Beckley's evasions of the Cambrian explosion, the Ediacara biota, and all that in Rocks for their volume 2. So there's going to be a lot going on here. I had thought I was done with Beckley because he was dead. But lo and behold, here's this stupid post of his back in, let me see, it was in August of 2024. That was running off on this. So it'll be an interesting thing for people who want to compare, and they can, if you want, you can follow up on some of the other papers as well. There's still a few of them that are also open access, but I'll be putting the main material on for everybody to play around with. Now, our little independent meringue that came along from this is that part of those teams, the Muller, who was criticizing their stuff, happened to be of another paper that I stumbled on that I hadn't recognized before, that relates to those crocodiles, of which Fernando Novis, which is some more of the people that are being dealt with, new transitional fossil from late Jurassic of Chile sheds light on the origin of modern crocodiles. And it's a relatively fragmentary example, but nonetheless, they're able to see some diagnostics on it that bit by bit, they're filling in more little fiddly bits. I think the fascinating bit about all of this stuff is how much data there is available. Just the charts from Muller and Sylvia Garcia's paper, which is trying to break down all of these critters and figure out their developments. Although Barron and Barrett were certainly contending that Chilesaurus would fit on the ornithschian side, these various systematics that have been done have not been helpful in that regard. And there will be in that same paper from Norman that I'll be putting a link up to that has this chart in it. They go into really great detail and indeed sub-detail in trying to analyze just exactly where Chilesaurus fits into these fields. And they've treated various different analyses, and no matter how you shuffle the deck, Chilesaurus is really lumping in at kind of like the base of the theropods. It's not really showing up over in the ornithschian side. A couple of papers have come along post Beckley's thing that, of course, he could hardly have responded to because they came along afterwards, from Cow in 2025 and let me see. And oops, trying to worm my way around my 2-page listing here. It's always a pisser when the technical descriptions for the stuff spills over a page. It also means I'll probably have to edit it down when I put it into the description because they have a word text limit on there. Anyway, 2024 paper from Cow and another analysis by Fonseca et al. 2024 that have done comprehensive stuff on ornithschians and the like, and both of them independently are putting Chilesaurus with the theropods, not with ornithschians. Do I have an emotional attachment to Chilesaurus being a theropod rather than an ornithschian? No, but at the moment, that's the status of the material. And it would be interesting, anybody who wants to dive into any of those papers can compare the details and the back and forth that they're doing and compare them with Beckley, who's just going in fluff mode. It's meringue. Now, the little sidebar that occurs before I get into our wonderful highball from, oops. I'm losing up a little thing here. I'm trying to work my way around through my chart in here. There we go. Okay, I got my part 2 listed properly. In the last couple days, there's a local astronomy club, and they were doing a little presentation conveniently up at our local library. So it was just a schnick of just having to stroll up on there. And along the way, there was a lecture on recent climate change, which is tracking back stuff going back like 10,000 years since the last ice age. And at one point, an older guy, about my age, although he's more wizened, I know that's not possible, but nonetheless he did. He was wanting to know where the flood fit into this chronology. And this kind of got dropped fairly quickly, but I realized he meant the flood. And so afterwards, I kind of sidled over to him and was kind of quizzing him about it because I'm annoying and curious. And it's clear that he was a full-blown young Earth creationist. And so I was very interested. I don't think he had any clue, although I was pointing out to him, I've studied this a great deal. And so I was able to respond in if great detail should that have arisen. But I was curious just to know, what did he think was the best evidence for this flood that he thought was happening? And he immediately shot out Mount St. Helens. So that gave the game away right away, because of course Mount St. Helens is no evidence at all for the flood. At most, you would say it's a nice piece of evidence for what can happen in a volcano, but it's not explaining how the Grand Canyon could be formed. It's not explaining how rock could lithify. It's not explaining why biogeography is the way it is. It's not explaining how the heat problem goes away. And he was unaware even that there was a heat problem, and he kind of backs off and harumphs that the fool who thinks himself wise, and then he skulks off to another section of the room. And I decided not to press the matter on the thing. No reason making a little fussbot on it. But it does show that indication about how ubiquitous that Mount St. Helens trope is in young Earth creationist apologetics. I didn't probe far enough to find out from where he was getting this material from, but it could be easily articles he was seeing at Answers in Genesis, or it could easily be articles he was seeing from Institute for Creation Research at Acts and Facts, because they trot it out constantly. So this is a one that is just a golden oldie hit that they keep pounding away at, even though it isn't helping their case in any respect whatsoever. Okay. On to the other cute little part of our little show, which is the ongoing plowing through source by source of Casey Luskin. He's got 4 papers from 2018 in this batch. Right off the bat, 2 of them are slamming right into the theodicy issue. Unfortunately, only one of the 4 I'm going to be able to give a full text material to. But I will be able to put links up to the extended abstract stuff that's at Science Direct, which is quite a few pages long. So it'll give you the main gist of things and a lot of their references and so forth. Anyway, a Zeng paper that was studying 32,000 transposable elements associated with regulation, and therefore 32,000, that's not a great deal. The biggest player, about 30% of that being ALUs. So we're talking about, 9,000 or so. Well, that's out of 1 million plus ALUs. So this is entirely consistent with the idea that the vast majority of these retrotransposons are not involved is showing more on ALUs in alternative splicing. That one is showing up in 2,584 long non-coding RNAs, which again is a revealingly low number to consider compared to stuff. And then the one that I will be able to give full text is from Brunei. On that other paper, that it's apparently they're concluding that the ALUs have, quote, a strong preference to locate at the 3' end of these molecules. So that's they're looking into a mechanism of that there's a tendency for ALUs to be latching on to particular sections of the genome, at some point. Okay, yes, did we just lose RJ? The counter is still running here, and the signal went off, so there may have been a slight visual interruption on that. Again, it's they're doing. I'm just a flotsam floating along on the stream. If they have a bumpy problem, I don't know why. The Brunei text is the one they'll be able to give full text. That's just a paper on detection techniques. ALUs come up toward the end, and We'll note that this chronological list that the ID bunch are never likely to deal with. The paper was discussing at the end how ALU that were active at different times during primate evolution, specifically ALUJ, 64 to 40 million years, ALUS, 45 to 25 million years, and ALUY, 30 million years to present, which would beg the question of when were these designs going deep into the primates, or the fact that they can do that for the primates. If we aren't related to primates, why would they have these ALUs as opposed to us? What is going on here? No intelligent design author has ever got anywhere near close enough to be able to pay attention to that. What can I say? We have a minute or so. Yes. Okay. So we at least anybody can be able to follow. Remember, I'll be putting the main material that I cover in the description and all the links, so people can kind of follow along with what the material is once we get posted. It would be really informative if at some bloody stage, any of these people trying to wave this stuff would be offering their model of the data rather than simply going harumph, this is supposedly helping stuff. And in the case of those two Theodicy papers, the Zeng and Nakama, good gravy. Does anybody at the Discovery Institute bother to read beyond what the abstract or the title? Are they not looking into the meat of the paper at all? And I suspect no, they're not. All they're doing is scavenging, they're trawling for things, and they're presuming, I'm sure Luskin was thinking that sheer numbers, 800 papers, my gosh, that's going to intimidate all of those poor little evolutionary scientists. Well, no, it doesn't. And indeed, if you got your data, you should be happy to have people plow down through it and look at every one of the bloody papers. But so far, it's not supporting their case. It's every bit of information that's been coming along is entirely consistent with the point that Dan Stern-Cardinale made when he was jousting with Luskin. And that is that there is, 10, 15, 20% of these retrotransposons are gaining some function or utility in some context. Yes, what's a model? Yes. The model is the thing that people that are scientific would be doing if they were scientific. And it's not going to be there if you are a pseudoscientist, because the vast majority of anti-evolution apologetics consists of it's God of the gaps. You can't explain X, therefore our side, as if that explained anything. But sorry, all that data is still out there. All those ALUs, all of these fossils, Chilesaurus, and all of the taxonomy of the Triassic and the Jurassic, all of that stuff is there. For credit separately, why do we share at least one gene with pretty much every single complex organism on the planet? Yeah. Yeah. And it's far worse than that. It's that you can really build up detailed phylogenies and structures to see what elements are present in various groups. One of the big things that's just starting to be delved into at full depth, as in like over the last 10 years, is that virtually all of the serious genetic architecture that makes multicellular organisms is present prior to multicellularity. That what we're seeing in, say, the Cambrian explosion, and presumably the Ediacaran thing as well, is the proliferation of various combinations of things that lead to all of these bigger forms. But the genetic architecture of the pieces were present in the component ancestor groups. And you move far enough back in time into that boring billions of years, seemingly, when nothing was going on in the fossil record, because everything is bacterial and they're not leaving fossils. All you can tell are the particular isotope balances and things that you would be seeing, but probably fantastically intricate things are happening at the biochemistry level in terms of all of these genetic systems that are running in the ancestors to choanoflagellates and in cyanobacteria and all these other things that are eventually building the interconnective architecture that once you start easing into multicellularity and move past the Volvox stage, and do so in multiple ways, that they're not inventing these genes out of thin air in the same way that all of the animal phyla are drawing off of homeobox genes. Now, exactly how homeobox genes originate is still an open question at the moment, although live long enough, maybe that'll be resolved as well. And it all involves meticulous genetic analysis and retro-engineering of things and plowing back to work out what precursors are, and where possible, test things by retro-engineering. The whole paleogenomics field keeps plowing along. And by and large, that paleogenomics material doesn't get discussed in the anti-evolution literature. Michael Behe bumps into it occasionally, and some of the bits of Elizabeth Mitchell was tripping over some of it in creationism land. But boy, it's not a topic that they're really dealing with much. What's their model besides God did it? In a very fundamental sense, they don't have a model other than that. No intelligent designer even gets to the notion of speculating about what a design event would look like. And Lord knows I tried. Whenever I bumped into people, the late Jonathan Wells, the late Philip Johnson, the not yet late Michael Behe, that whenever I would try to pin them down as to what they think was going on with topics they were bringing up, the reptile-mammal transition for Johnson, bird evolution for Jonathan Wells, and whale evolution for Behe, they are nowhere near thinking through what the hell they think happened. And they have no interest or desire to do so. You listen to Steve Meyer, there is this just vacuous nothing going on. And when you listen to people who listen to Steve Meyer and try to ask them about what they think Steve Meyer thinks happened, they don't know, because he doesn't know. It doesn't get to that stage. Now, young Earth creationists at least have kind of a model, but it's not one that they have really any negotiating room on. They're forced into it, that there was a creation week 6,000 years ago. All kinds of all types were made then and only then, no more after that. Then, 1,000 years or so later on, sinful mankind triggers off the flood, and all the little critters that have presumably hyperspeciated into varieties during the periods that we call the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic, and they get killed off during the flood. Then the ones that are on board the ark then extrapolate and form new forms, which we see in the present species balance. So they're forced into thinking about hyperspeciation and all of this. And a lot of those attitudes have only come along in the last 20 years or so, because of the fact that they can't limit have to limit the amount of things on Noah's Ark. So the baraminology movement and the whole attitudes about trying to dispose of speciation rates and things, and eliminating bottlenecks in population, and that by compressing everything down, is forced on them by the fact that they can't deny what the data are. They're not generating their own data. They're basically hitchhiking off of the regular science papers. So when Nathaniel Jensen would be doing analyses, he's not generating his own data field of genetics. He's not going into the lab and doing genotyping of organisms. No, he's riffing off of already existing science work and then compressing it like an accordion to fit the chronology, leading, as Dan Stern-Cardinale has pointed out, to absolutely preposterous conclusions, where they're having particular alleles showing up by the Jensen compressed model in the Middle Ages. He's having human beings not calling, a lot of the Native Americans not coming to the Americas until like the Middle Ages, because they're forced into it by this telescoping scale, rammed in, because everything's got to happen after the flood 4,500 years ago. And it's hilarious, and it's not making any headway anyway whatsoever. But at least they're trying in a clumsy way. It's no coincidence that baraminology only exists in young Earth creationism. Still waiting on them to explain how roos got to Australia. There's a handful of posts. If you hunt around through AIG and ICR, there are ones where they think they've explained it. So they have marsupials getting on giant rafts of rotting vegetation. This is kind of Kurt Wise's approach, but it's never gets beyond the cartoon stage to work out, well, what to what? Well, first of all, what's the land masses look like? What was the pre-flood world? What were the pre-flood continental distributions? What organisms were living where during this time? Good luck for that. In fact, you can't even get an agreement. It's one of the things we'll be bringing out in Rocks Were There Volume 2 as to what the continental distribution was. Some groups in young Earth creationism are convinced that the pre-flood world was Pangaea, because that's the continent that they're easiest when they hunt up on National Geographic. At least the Ark Encounter crowd and the Creation Museum at AIG have progressed to stealing earlier data because they're aware of Rodinia. So they tend to favor the idea of pre-flood world being Rodinia, which is a completely different continental distribution. And then it's breaking up during the flood or after the flood into Pangaea and then into our current distribution. Well, needless to say, that's also fun from a heat point of view and continents moving around at race car speed and all that. And why didn't we all find the kinds in the Ararat era? Indeed. The same thing goes for plants, things, of course, that can move around relatively easily. Why are we finding the distributions that we are? Which gets down to that horrible word biogeography, which is no coincidence. One of the things that got both Darwin and Wallace going on the evolution thing independently, because they noticed what organisms were living where, especially how distinctive the fauna of islands were. Hawaii is a beautiful test case. The fact that you've got most of the world's fruit flies are endemic to Hawaii. Why? Critters that can fly can end up there by one another, whereas anything big enough that it couldn't get there by swimming or flying ain't going to be there. So even though Hawaii is easily big enough to handle larger critters, and in fact, pigs and others have gone berserk when they were brought by human beings, but critters on islands are always distinctively characteristic, and the farther away they are from the mainland, the more isolated they are. And the things that are on there are things that are most likely to have arrived from the nearest mainland. And so the kinds of the designer could easily have put in distributions of critters that would have been just a mess to try to explain from an evolutionary perspective. Or, as we pointed out in Rocks Were There Volume 1, that there are so many permutations of the genetic code that as to if the assignments of amino acids to codons was arbitrary, which I don't think it was the case, but creationists are hard to pin down on this one either. But if they were purely arbitrary, there's so many combinations that you could have had that literally every kind easily could have had its own proprietary DNA code, totally distinct from any other. They would all still be making the same amino acids, so there'd be complete interchangeability of the products, but the genetic code producing them could have been completely proprietary and kind specific. That would have been a dead giveaway of a created design, but that's not what we find. Instead, everything is a variation on a single genetic code where the only outliers are weird crap that's going on in mitochondria and a few other spots where a natural process has permitted them to change the codon assignments to some other things, or even have double dipping in the case of some mitochondria, where they still have the old assignment and also can make use of it for a new assignment because of the way their the transcription systems and that work. All of which is completely consistent with evolutionary. So it's just a complete mess when it comes to trying to work out what the model is. And anybody wanting to criticize creationists should always hold their feet to the fire, ask for a bloody model, as well as sources for their views so that you can pin them down on it. And so they're simply grumbling, well, evolution supposedly explains so-and-so, fill in the blank, ain't good enough. Just as you need to be able to reply if some smiley-faced old creationist tries to tell you that Mount St. Helens is supporting the flood. Sorry, this don't explain lithification. It doesn't explain the heat problem. It doesn't explain biogeography. It doesn't explain why the Egyptians don't know about a flood, all of which are going to be discussed at length in Volume 2 of the Rocks Were There. Just nearing the end of that damn cosmology chapter, just finished off the stuff on the moon, a few other things. So let me put my thank you note for our people who have continued to help us month by month at Patreon. I am well aware of the fact that we are getting into increasingly dicey land in terms of our economy. And so everybody that has stuck it out I am most grateful because it helps every single month to squeak along one way after the other. That and my book royalties and Social Security, that's my income stream, kids. So there we go. And then as well, then I suppose we should be putting up a neat little advert here for volume 1 of the book. Come on. You going? Waiting for the. There we go. Come on. There we go. Sometimes my little steam-powered computer has its slow moments. And behold, Peter's wonderful little advert for volume 1. I'm sure we will have a new one for volume 2 once we have that out, which should be in 2026. Still a lot of work to do on material. Jackson has a couple chapters left to do. I've got to tackle the one chapter he's already completed that's in our mid-range. But we're beginning to see the darkness at the end of the tunnel. And it's tackling so much material that if you thought we had covered everything in volume 1, nope. More to come. Cosmology, paleontology, paleogeography, legends, mythology, and endless streams of creationists shooting their foot off, including Gunter Beckley and his stupid attempts to defuse the Cambrian explosion. We cover both intelligent design, a little bit of old Earth creationism, and lots of young Earth creationism. Holy smokes, lots of it. Okay, where's our little window? Get that out of the way. Yes, Trump needs to go. Absolutely. Yes, I will wax political for this little bit, pointing out that we are in an interesting thing. One of the things that have been burbling along is how Congress passed a little bit of legislation to try to prevent Congress people from doing crypto stuff, but they deliberately exempted the President of the United States from that rule. So all that crypto, which is just a funnel for corruption, as we know from the crypto guy who funneled money through the United Arab Emirates into the crypto bank, $2 billion worth. And then lo and behold, Mr. Trump, not knowing anything about him, he says publicly, I don't know anything about this. Pardon the guy. So it is the Trump administration is shooting off the scales as the most brazenly corrupt administration. But the irony is that Trump, is doubling down, tripling down in the world of crypto. I think crypto is the tulip bulb fiasco of our times, along with a lot of AI, that when the bubble bursts, there can be nothing left. So if Trump is putting all of his family's money and his resources into crypto, well, that may be bye-bye, bear birdie, when everything falls apart. We will be seeing one way or the other on that. We have not yet hit the crash that I'm expecting. There's been little fluctuations of hundreds of points on the Dow. It's sagging back from that 48,000 high, but no, when I'm talking crash, I'm talking tens of thousands of points down. So, and that if it follows the tracking of the 2930 crash, would involve a year or more. So it could have a major collapse and then a bump along into 26 and then another big drop off there. And given the fact, the tulip bulb things, yes, that's back in like the 17th century. There was a mania, a speculative bubble over tulip bulbs, where like Beanie Babies, tulip bulbs got to be traded so frenetically that people were treating them kind of as a quasi-currency and thinking that, wow, we better get in and buy your tulip bulbs. And it eventually reached the point when it was a giant Ponzi scheme where the people who were coming into the bubble late in the game were paying exorbitant amounts for tulip bulbs, and the people who had sold them the tulip bulbs had made exorbitant amounts of money. And then everything fell apart, poof, because it's not a real thing. Well, crypto is not a real thing, and it's an energy hog, not a real thing. One power failure and billions of dollars in imaginary crypto money could vaporize in a puff of cybernut. And likewise for a lot of the AI material, another big energy hog that has some adaptive uses, but boy, all the business analysts are starting to have very dark notes. And one of these big people who had sold short during the 2008 real estate meltdown is selling short on AI again today. So he's anticipating that the AI is going to go boom. So you have potentially two major energy hog bubbles that the Trump administration is trying to buoy up. That can be potential triggers, of which then you have the systemic problems lurking behind things that turn a recession panic into a depression. The fact that health insurance is so costly, that you've got income distribution issues where most of the, we're coming to the point where half of the economy is driven just by the spending of people at the top now, and not regular people. People have been noticing how revenue and franchises have been closing at McDonald's and Burger King and a lot of these fast food, Kentucky Fried Chicken, these places. These are all signs that people down in the regular working folk level are really getting tight. And you have an awful lot of train wrecks ready to collide all at once. And given the fact that Trump is a business incompetent and a business fraud and a grifting monstrosity, this guy is no Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was a skilled tactician who did the best he could in an environment after the crash that was exceeding the parameters of conventional republicanism. Trump is not in that ballpark. He is an incompetent business fraud who you've given the keys to the car and he's going to drive it off the cliff. Or if you want another analogy, watch the delightful comedy Big Broadcast of 1938 with Bob Hope. It's worth the fun for all the different people. W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields plays a dual role, one of which is this complete doofus who steers the ocean liner Gigantic straight into an ice field in a fog until he's finally overpowered by the captain and crew that he locked in a side room. It's got Martha Ray too, and it's just and the song "Thanks for the Memory." I'll put a little blurb in there about that. The Big Broadcast of 1938. It's a delightful musical comedy that was part of a whole series of Big Broadcast movies. I think the one of 36 or 37 was with an early Jack Benny. So it was often fielding people that were starting to make a big name in radio, which Bob Hope was at that time as well. And so this is one of his earliest film appearances. And then the other one that you'd want to probably watch with Bob Hope would be the Ghost Breakers that he did with Paulette Goddard, which I think is one of the classic comedic ghost stories, thrillers that's been around that would blend in with Ghostbusters from a completely different generation. Anyway, yeah, well, we're operating in a very weird environment politically in terms of the breakdowns of states. There's you can find situations where a governor would be going for the Democrats, and yet Trump is carrying the state. And this is all going back to the degree to which the electorate, 77 million voters, and however many 10 million or plus who voted in 24 or 20, but didn't vote in 24, have insular media. They're relying on unreliable sources. They're not fact-checking and all of that. And we'll have to correct this as a society because otherwise we're just going to have more Trump nutballs from one perspective or another showing up, although Trump is an unusual situation for being this kind of Kent Hovind-esque, hyper-confident, bullshitting fellow, and so many of his acolytes just, fawn over him because of how seemingly strong he is. You find a lot of the same obsessions with people fawning over Hitler or Mussolini, Stalin, in the same way, the personality cult aspect. But anybody thinking that the economy is going to do what Mr. Trump wants it to do just because he says so, I give you a mass of worthless Taj Mahal casino chips to indicate that nope. So anyway, we're along there. Is any little questions along in the side. 2025 bodes well for a blue tsunami in 26. Assuming we actually have fair elections in 26, it's entirely interesting. And the same thing will be going elsewise. And nothing quite gets people's attention than a collapsing economy. And Mr. Trump, utterly incapable. The Besant and these other people, they're arrogant. Their business incompetence. Besant was a business failure on in his ventures, so it's just colossal. The same thing as Navarro in the previous administration. Another person I think Trump pardoned late in the day. I don't think he's serving anything in the current administration. But this is if you took the Tweed ring and had them all lobotomized, and yet they are still running around doing grifts. It's just unbelievable that from a historical perspective, this is just shooting off the scales for the sheer level of incompetence. And I hold accountable 100% of the senators who voted to confirm all of these nutballs, Kash Patel and Hegseth and all the rest. Their voters should absolutely throw them out at the earliest opportunity because they clearly lack judgment. And to the extent that the voters don't think they lack judgment, that's part of our problem, kids. So a douche nozzle. Yes, there we go. Although to some, the Trump administration is so pathetic that it's giving douche nozzles a bad name, I can tell you. So anyway, everybody stay safe. There's a lot of rainstorms that are flooding in California. Who knows what messes are going to occur in other areas. We're in the 21st century here. Climate is going out of control in a lot of areas. Mucky, blech. But that's what we got to do. We got to deal with it one way or another. And the Trump administration, because of their anti-climate attitudes, will be slowing down our response to this, not ending it, because companies aren't brain dead. There will be even elements within the military that will still have to pay attention to stuff. I mean, Hampton Roads, the water level's rising. So there's just no doubt whatsoever that you're going to have some responses to these things. But Trump wants us to have battleships and steam-powered catapults again. Whoa, okay. Meanwhile, we're showing that our incredibly expensive aircraft carriers with their task force are able to sporadically bomb what may or may not be drug boats coming out of Venezuela. Wow, there is a powerful use of our fantastically expensive military. There will be hearings in future about the just colossal waste of money up and down when they try to total up all of the elements of the wastage and incompetence of this administration. So anyway, in the coming months, not steady. Yeah, it's an El Nino year. We're supposedly going to be having a little bit more moisture and stuff in my neck of the woods. Whether or not it ends up in snow on my driveway is another matter, but we'll see about that. So anyway, everybody stay bloody safe. Watch out for the laser-toting penguins. Watch out for the crazy train ice people and some of the, we forget the ice wall. Worry about the ice raiders and their crazy trains bit. To some extent, maybe after the oil, although it didn't do us any good in Iraq either. Never underestimate the sheer incompetence of the Trump administration to be able to snatch a defeat from the jaws of victory. This is a tremendous capacity that they have. And so there's a certain morbid entertainment value going on. But meanwhile, we're the ones having to take the brunt of stuff. I fortunately am living on the West Coast here, where we still have some functionally brainstem active people running the governments and the like. And so we will hopefully try, and there will be other states will be in the same situation, to where we will try to hold the line and not go down the rabbit hole when the shit happens. And the same thing in other areas. I'll be interested to see what happens in the European Union and various other places in response to when our Trumptanic finally slams into a few icebergs. So anyway, yes, greetings sentient beings, just in time to have me shut off the show. Anyway, everybody stay safe, and we will see you all next week, by which time I may be in Seattle. So if you see a different background, I got to prep all my shows up to for the holiday seasons, and then we will be back home sometime in December. So anyway, bye.